tariff impacts on data have just begun. You're talking tip of the spear, just beginning. It's not only going to last a year, it's going to last more than a year if the tariffs stay in place.
The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate and actual performance may differ. As always, please remember investing involves risk.
I tried to knock one out before the meeting. But then our software decided to go and off itself, and so I had to redo this. Probably helps me in a therapeutic sense, since it was largely just an inflation rant. So I'm going to do that again, and by the end of my second inflation rant, I'm kind of hoping I'll feel better, and maybe there'll be some peace at the end. In addition to that, I can talk a little bit about perplexity, and then of course we'll lead the way with markets first. Big up day for the markets. S&P up 1.1. Q is up about almost 1.3. Massive day for small caps, up almost 3%. Equal weight up 1.3. Mag 7 only up 1.12. So Mag 7 kind of been leading the way lately, and today kind of lagging, especially small caps. But we get these at least like once a quarter where small caps just go ballistic to the upside. Never seems to work out in the end. But we had, interestingly enough, all world ex-US up the exact same amount as the S&P at 1.13%. We had the dollar down 0.45. We had oil down a little over 1%. Gold flat, silver flat. Good day for copper, up at 1.7. You had the 2-year yield down 3 basis points, kind of showing that it looks like this September cut's definitely going to happen. 10-year flat, though, and then 30-year up 3 basis points, kind of teasing breaking above a little bit of a short-term downtrend line there, which is at least a little bit interesting. We talked about how cheap vol was yesterday, and then it got a lot cheaper today, down 6%, down under 16. Spot VIX is under 15 now. Which gets interesting as we have options expiration on Friday. So you kind of get to recycle that gamma and start back over next week. Who knows what happens there? And that's really when seasonality starts to turn. I keep talking about seasonality, but it doesn't really go into effect until starting next week. So definitely a good day for markets. My rant, of course, will attach to inflation, and that's really the reason the market seemed to be up today. So both markets and experts and market commentators all seem to agree. It's pretty much a consensus. Good report. There's not really any inflation to worry about. We can cut rates. All good. For me, like every once in a while, I have this moment where I'm like, wow, like I just have this big fundamental disagreement with the way people are treating something in the market. It happens to me maybe once or twice a year. And this is definitely one of those moments where I'm looking at the data, and then I'm looking at the narrative and the price action surrounding the data, and I'm at a loss. And I'll kind of just go through all the reasons why there. And first and foremost, inflation is 2.7%. Core inflation is 3.1%, and both of these are reaccelerating. Like that's not continued progress from where we came from. We bottomed in April, and we're moving higher. April is when we had Liberation Day and the tariffs put on. And which is another interesting part of this is there's a lot of people convinced like, oh yeah, see, there's no tariff inflation. They don't cause inflation. When in reality, we bottomed in April and we keep moving higher. Now, markets at times will get caught up in month over month numbers. And if it's a little better than we thought, then that's a celebration. So even if I told you like, ooh, month over month, it's going to be up 2% just month over month. But then it came in at 1.9, the market would be like, well, that wasn't bad. You're like, well, never mind the fact that 2% annualizes over 20%, right? So there's some of that here because headline came in a smidge under expectations, though core came in kind of a smidge above. But just, zoom out and we're closer to 3% than 2%, and we're moving higher. None of that suggests, something to celebrate or cut rates about. And I'll go through a lot of these different data points from from inside of the numbers to kind of make the point that we are seeing inflation reaccelerate, especially in goods. Obviously, um, you know, the tariffs are going to hit goods. Like that's good. That's kind of clear. That's what the tax is literally on. But I do think it can flow into services in other ways. The kind of headlines you saw today were like, "Oh, services is still kind of an issue, but goods is fine. Goods was higher this month than last month." So I don't know what people were talking about. Um, Services are staying a little stickier than expected, which I think is a huge problem for the Fed, for markets, however you look at it. Um, it's just a matter of when people will, I guess, realize this. But one of the key reasons I think this is worse than everyone thinks is CPI diffusion, which is just a fancy way of saying if you took all the components that are inside the CPI, all the things we measure, and then you broke down how many of them are, say over 2% or over 4%, what percentage of those components, that has dramatically worsened this year. So if you go back to the beginning of the year, we were 50-50 essentially. 50% were above 2%, 50% were below 2%. Kind of made you feel like, all right, we're getting this thing back under control after, you go back to 2021 and that the over 2% stuff was like 60s, 70s. Being back to 50-50 felt good. Not to mention the stuff that's over 4%. At one point you were in the high 50s on the components over 4. That dropped all the way down under 40. Start feeling good about it. Well, now the stuff over 2%, over 70% of the components are above 2%, which is, the inflation target. So more than 2/3 of the stuff we measure is above target. And how much stuff is under 2%? 27%. So less than a third are under it. And notably, 42% of the stuff we measure is above 4%. So way like double, literally double the inflation target. Almost half of the stuff we measure is double the inflation target. It's like not only are those numbers bad, but they've inflected higher since beginning of the year, April, however when we got tariffs, however you want to look at it. Core inflation, as I mentioned, 3.1%. The 3-month and 6-month annualized numbers, the lowest you got there is 2.4%. So even on the shorter term metrics, you're not at or below target or even close. If you look at year over year core inflation, we bottomed in April, which is when we put the tariffs on, and we've kind of started to move higher. Super core, same thing, bottomed in April, finally got under 3%, started feeling good about it. Well, now you're back above 3.2%, going the wrong direction. Core goods inflation is just retire all year and has gone from a deep deflation back into a reasonably significant inflation for goods. Goods for most of the last 20 years sat in deflation. So when they're up at all, it's kind of significant. When they're up more than 1%, I would argue it's very significant, and we are right now. You're at above it's at a more than 2-year high for core goods inflation. So again, this whole like, where's the tariff inflation? Bros out there like, well, it's in goods. Literally, core goods is the highest it's been in over 2 years. Like, what do you mean? Where is it? Auto inflation, same thing. You're at least a 2-3-year high for auto inflation, and that includes used vehicles. You're seeing it in car parts, new vehicles to a degree, although that hasn't been that bad yet. But I'm sure to come. You're at 2% right now. We have 25% tariffs on a lot of car imports, 15% on others. And then effectively, I would say we have more than a 15% tariff on domestic production, thanks to really high tariffs on steel, aluminum, car parts, all that kind of stuff. Car parts themselves at a 2-year high, pushing back above 2.3%. I would suggest that's probably going to keep moving higher. And that, you were barely above 1 back in April. Household furnishings from deflation back to 1.7% inflation and pointed straight up on the chart. 2.5-year high for furniture inflation. Same thing. You've gone from deep deflation back into inflation there. Housekeeping supplies. Think of paper products and cleaning products. That stuff has gone from basically being nothing back to being well above 1%, highest in over a year. Tools and hardware, highest since 2023, has come out of deflation back into inflation. Dishes and decorations, you're at a over 2.5 year high. You're over 2.5% inflation on that stuff. Here, I mean, you're talking about like, fake plants and dishes and cookware and tableware and clocks and lamps and all that kind of stuff. And this is stuff every day people buy every day. And you're pushing back above 2.5% after being in deflation all of 2024. It feels significant to me. And it feels like we're seeing tariffs there. Same for floor coverings, window coverings, linens. Linen inflation on its own is 4%. I think everyone buys linens. Appliances, deep deflation last year. You're back into inflation. You're at an over 2 year high. Toys, same thing. Personal care products, highest in a year. So, broad message here being inflation is still above target. And not only is it still above target by a lot, but it's reaccelerating higher. And it's absolutely, right at the moment, concentrating itself into tariff sensitive stuff. Services inflation is still kind of sticky, but we know housing disinflation is intact. We know energy is in deflation. Like, we have so many things helping us, and we're still 2.7 and 3.1. And it's worth noting in this report, the stuff that feeds through into PCE was pretty warm. So if you get a PPI, the stuff in PPI that feeds through to PCE, which is the inflation measure the Fed cares most about, that's their target. If those PPI measures are warm, then you're going to get a hot PCE, which could take this, we're definitely cutting in September thing and kind of throw it out the window, or at least make it like a 50-50 split on the FOMC and make it really tough to kind of go either way. So yes, the market thinks we're for sure cutting in September, and because of that, you have to agree until that changes. But as early as tomorrow, if PPI is hot, and I'm not saying it is, PPI, I have no idea, but if it is hot, that PCE number is going to be ugly, and that it makes it hard to cut. And speaking of, hard to cut, it's not every day that you cut into 3.1% core inflation, especially as it is inflecting higher. And I saw a tweet earlier from his name's escaping me at the moment. It'll come to me in a minute, but showing that if you take 3.1% core and the inflection higher, like only one time in the last, I think it was like 40 years, have you cut into that. So that's pretty significant stuff if we're going to cut into 3.1% and going higher inflation. And I think some people's argument is like, who cares? Like, yeah, inflation's 3 or whatever, but we're just going to cut anyways. And then they're going to cut some more. And so why even worry about it? My thing on that is like, that's not a free lunch. Like, for the moment, I think the market wants to have it both ways of we can cut, but it's not that bad. It's like inflation's good. If we start cutting into 3.5, God forbid, 4% inflation, it removes a lot of a thin veneer of credibility from the Fed on inflation fighting. And if you have to kind of redo all your math for bonds, say, on inflation break-evens, for what this looks like 5, 10, 15, 30 years from now for bonds, like you have to re-rate what kind of inflation impact you expect on that stuff. And then the yields on those things can kind of turn around and punish the real economy. For now, bonds are like, who cares? But I would argue if inflation is going to push past 3 and we're just going to cut anyways, which seems to be what the market thinks, and that's a free ride, it won't be a free ride. So that's why I think it's important. I'm not saying we're not going to cut into that stuff. We probably will. I'm just saying that that's not a free lunch. And even if you cap yields, it's not a free lunch. That all this stuff in essence gets paid in a real way, one way or another. And that just may be, standards of living because inflation hurts them. It may be politically, but these things kind of have to get paid for. So broad point there being the market seems to think inflation is totally fine and that there is no tariff inflation. And I think it's dead wrong. I think, in my opinion, 3.3% inflation isn't nothing. The fact that it's accelerating higher isn't nothing. The fact that a lot of that acceleration is coming from tariff stuff is not nothing. And I'll reiterate something I've said on the show a few times, and that is the tariff impacts on data have just begun. You're talking tip of the spear, just beginning. It's not only going to last a year, it's going to last more than a year if the tariffs stay in place. So this is just the beginning. Like, this isn't over by any means. If it hits the economy hard, it can keep inflation down, no doubt. But is it a win if you keep inflation down in a recession? Of course not. So
The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate, and actual performance may differ.
the other thing I wanted to talk about was kind of two different things on Perplexity. One, they're offering apparently Google $34 billion, I think it is, to buy Chrome. This is substantial because they already have their own browser called Comment, which is better than Chrome. It's Chrome based, so it just looks and feels like Chrome in a lot of ways, but it's better. It lets you do a lot of cool AI stuff, even cool agentic AI stuff, where you can be like, oh, go schedule a meeting with this person in anytime they have available on this day, and it'll just do it. Like, sends the emails, the whole 9 yards, right? It can, schedule travel for you. It can build you an itinerary and then email it to you, and block out times on that itinerary for it's neat. It really can do genuine agent stuff. It's way better than Chrome. So like if they bought Chrome, they would probably just more or less make Chrome Comment, and then that really lets them get their hands on a lot of users because so many people currently use Chrome. And then they can start to like actually more head-to-head compete with the other players like OpenAI, etc. So it's a big deal. And then it would help obviously Google deal with their antitrust situation, where they're getting pressure from the courts to get rid of Chrome anyway. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I think that would be bad for Google because I think Chrome's a big deal and important. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I doubt it gets done, but I could see where it makes a lot of sense for both sides in different ways. But interesting to watch. The other thing I want to talk about with Perplexity, and you guys know I'm a Perplexity zealot and I've talked about it many times, but they have a new function called tasks where you basically tell it to do something, and it just on a regular basis, whatever you tell it to do, it just does this thing for you and sends it to you. So I had it do, hey, I want like a weekly breakdown of all the week's most significant technology developments, because I don't sit there and read tech journals or tech magazines. I'm more into the weeds on the macro stuff and the policy stuff and those things that kind of just frankly interest me more most of the time. So I just want to read off a few examples that came in this past week's email that, and some of the stuff I had not seen. One of them is Google Research unveiled a new machine learning engineering agent that automates its entire machine learning workflow. So it won 63% of Kaggle competitions it entered. It outperformed human machine learning engineers and previous AI agents like OpenAI's models. It uses web search to find state-of-the-art approaches and then iteratively improves on the solutions. It incorporates debugging, data leakage, checking, data usage verification modules. So it's actually pretty thorough as well. And the argument here is like this is a paradigm shift where AI can now autonomously conduct its own machine learning research and development. So you're seeing this more and more where AI is doing its own AI building. And with Zuck throwing $200 million at AI researchers and engineers, it's easy for us to think about like, oh man, that coder down the street might lose his job to AI. Well, maybe even the Otani of AI engineering will lose out to AI at some point. And that's something I think is significant. Speaking of that, one of the things it talked about was a AI-driven workforce transformation, which we talked about this a little bit. Like I talked about how the percent of tech jobs out of all the jobs had been climbing. All of a sudden, ChatGPT comes and that starts to drop. Well, the Perplexity quantified that with the news this week, and the tech industry has let go of 131,000 tech workers so far this year. And that's across 434 events, averaging 627 jobs per day. And companies are explicitly citing AI efficiency as a primary driver, with roles in HR, software engineering, and administration being automated. This is clearly a big deal moving forward. I keep talking about how jobs in state and local governments are at risk. Obviously, construction, the dead horse, have just much maligned. Um, Manufacturing, trucking, all this stuff where I'm worried about these cyclicals. And then you think of tech is like, oh, tech just keeps going up, just always goes up, right? Well, now it might be its own force of always going down. Something to be concerned about, I would say. It's great from a productivity standpoint, obviously, but sort of like, you know, offshoring jobs is great from getting cheap stuff and being more productive as a species. Like, sure, but ask people in Cleveland or Buffalo or Pittsburgh how they felt about it, right? Same thing could be happening here. Like, yes, this is good for all of us. At the end of the day, we're all more productive, but ask the person, and I guess perhaps Palo Alto that lost their job, or Seattle or San Francisco or whatever. But something to think about moving forward. Speaking of agentic AI, AWS launched a comprehensive tool for enterprise AI agents at their AWS Summit. So they have this agent core, 7 core services for deploying AI agents at scale. They have this new marketplace category for AI agents and tools. They've invested $100 million into it in their generative AI innovation center. So we are starting to see that shift more from like, oh, let me answer your dumb questions on a chatbot, to like agents and doing stuff. And this will keep evolving and getting better as we move forward. Something with China and AI that's important, and we had news there today, and I talked about this on the show yesterday, saying, China, we finally are like, all right, fine, sell some chips to China, right? That's fine. Just pay us some money for it. We'll figure out a way to make that legal at some point, I guess, and it's fine. And I kind of warned, like, China seemed to be taking a beat there to go, wait a second, like, we see what you're doing here. We don't want to play this game. Like, they want to develop their own stuff. So the last thing they want is all their tech companies just buying a whole bunch of NVIDIA chips. Well, they did come out today and basically say, like, maybe don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't use it for government stuff, things like that. Now, do I think that's going to take NVIDIA's exports to China to zero? Like, I'm not even close. I think most private people that aren't doing government stuff are still going to use them as long as they can. But my assumption would be that it does hit that to a degree, and maybe China studies this more and decides to be a little more forceful with the direction on that. But also in the China AI world, they're advancing towards AI independence. Their domestic AI compute market share is expected to get up to 90% by the end of the decade. Their semiconductor self-sufficiency is projected to get to 27% this year. So one of the reasons they're probably pushing back on get all this NVIDIA chips is they're getting decent at building their own. And then companies like DeepSeek demonstrating obviously the capability to build competitive models with much more limited resources. You see it with Alibaba and their Quinn models. Like, I mean, they're almost just as good as OpenAI right now, and clearly with much, much less CapEx and infrastructure, which, just considering that they are the ones that have all the electricity compared to us, and they're not even having to use it for this stuff yet. Like, it's a big deal. With that said, I think the average model builder in China, if they could get the best chips in the world, would rather do that than, try to get the most out of domestic chips that haven't fully caught up yet. But just an example of a few of the takeaways from this AI task of just like, hey, at the end of every week, tell me what happened with this thing that I'm not watching close enough to not miss stuff. Because I definitely missed this new machine learning, engineer, like, agentic model thing. I had no idea that was a thing until reading through this. Just wanted to show that as an example. But that's all I have for today. I mentioned PPI. That'll be important to me tomorrow, especially the measures of that flow through to PCE. And then we get some more important data throughout the rest of the week to include retail sales. But that's it for us today. Back tomorrow with more. Don't forget, you can download and subscribe at knowyourriskpodcast.com. check us out on YouTube, Instagram, everywhere else that you can find us. And that's it for today. Cheers.
Investment advice cannot be given without a client service agreement. Zach Abraham is an investment advisor representative of Trek Financial, an SEC registered investment advisor. Bulwark Capital Management is a marketing name only and does not carry a separate registration.